About today are the invertebrates. So yesterday we kind of talked about body plans and how animals are built, how there's similarities between them, and then the differences that make them in different phyla. Today we're going to talk about the specific invertebrates. That means they do not have a backbone. All right. Some of them still have a spinal cord. They just don't have the vertebrate part of it that protects the spinal cord. They may have water skeletons, which is basically they pump water in there to hold their body, like octopi, stuff like that. They may have a skeleton made out of bone, but not be a true skeleton, or they may have what's called an exoskeleton. Okay? And that's like grasshoppers and stuff that have shells on them. But all of these do not have a vertebra, that's why they're called invertebrates. So again, most of the stuff we're going to talk about, of the beginning of these guys, is going to be fossil evidence. That means we have seen that these were alive. All right? Whether it was buried in rock or soil or whatever it is, we've dug them up or found them. And they've used bioevolution, which is studying the living evolution and where it was. And they kind of put together, hey, this thing lived in this area. This is what the area was like, so it had to have at least some of these characteristics. So they can start describing these creatures and kind of telling what they should have looked like, what they did look like from their skeletons or their fossil and so on. Then we're going to look at a cladiogram of these invertebrates, kind of talk about how they evolved over time. Now, did they all show up in 5 minutes or 5 million years? Well, that's all the stuff through evolution and fossil evidence and all that we look at. But the cladiogram is going to show us what developed along the way and when we got new creatures. Okay? How they got there, that's for you. But that they were there, we're going to look at. So again, our fossil record is going to show they began evolving long before what's called the Cambrian explosion. Right? How many of y'all know anything about like the Earth's timeline? You've probably been told some of the terms and studied it a little, but do you kind of remember or know it offhand any? Not much? Okay, so, but y'all do know that they've got a timeline established for the Earth, starting from when we think the Earth may have started to now. And that timeline is basically going to be divided into epochs. That's just a big grouping of years, all right? And we're not talking hundreds, we're talking thousands, sometimes millions of years. One of them that you probably heard of is called the Jurassic period, right? You ever heard of that one? Did they have parks then? No, that was a movie, right? Jurassic Park. But Jurassic was whenever the dinosaurs lived, correct? And we have fossil evidence that proves how old they are. We can test, we can say they lived here then. Okay? Well, another time period is called the Cambrian. And that Cambrian explosion, it doesn't mean that that's the only time that all of these species came into existence, but it means that when we say the Cambrian explosion, there is a time period in there, in the Cambrian time period, that lots of new species, fossils, have been found. So we can't say they weren't here. There are just no fossils of them before. Does that make sense? So it's called an explosion because there's lots of new creatures we discovered during that time period of fossils. So when it's talking about that, these guys were long before. Some of these fossils were long before that. So animals have been here a long time. But this Cambrian explosion starts showing lots and lots and lots more animals, new animals, things that hadn't been on the planet or that we had no fossils to. So the Cambrian explosion is a big epic or time period that's talked about with animal evolution. All right, we started getting these guys. We have stuff now that's called a trilobite. We have fossils of them. Okay? We have guys that are like this. We call it chambered nautilus. Well, this one looks kind of like it. It's a soft body and a shell. Again, they found fossils, and then where these things live, they were able to kind of put together and piece together what they should have looked like and how they lived and that stuff about where they were. These guys kind of look like sponges. Okay, we have a horseshoe crab that looks kind of like this guy. So again, there's some organisms that we still have now that look a lot like things that appeared then. So this fossil evidence shows they were here. shows they were invertebrates, shows we had animals back in that time period. So our cladiogram. Again, this is a cladiogram of just the invertebrates. You notice over here, it says chordates. Those are the ones that have a nerve cord, a true spinal cord. To the far left, you'll see it says multicellular. That means that the creatures before then were only unicellular. We can't find any fossil evidence showing there are animals that are multicellular occurring before that period. Okay? Then along came tissues. So sponges, remember we talked yesterday, they don't have tissues. They don't have anything. They're an animal, but they're basically just a creature that lives. There's no tissues. There's no levels to it. There was no skeleton. It just grows and it has mass to it. Lots of cells, and then there's cells that pump water through and cells that filter the food. But it had no tissues, no coelom, no cavity to its body, none of that. So it's really, really very, not really uninvolved, but it's just very low as far as all of the structures that make it an advanced creature. The next thing that came along is a true tissue. Cnidarians, those jellyfish and things, those were the first ones that had true tissues. We talked about that yesterday. They had the ectoderm and the endoderm, no mesoderm, nothing in the middle. Then the next thing that shows up in the fossil record is 3 germ layers. That's the ecto, endo, and mesoderm. So body cavities or possible cavities are starting to show up a little. And bilateral symmetry. To this point, everything was radially symmetrical. What did that mean, John? What was radial symmetry? What did we say it was? You don't remember anything about radial symmetry yesterday?
I don't know what that was.
You don't remember what it was, do you?
A circle.
Yeah, it had to do with the circle. And what about that circle, Eddie? You remember as a circle? You remember the picture it had up there? What was the picture?
I don't know. I remember.
You remember a little? You're talking about like the little things through it? What did the thing look like? Just kind of tell me. Yeah, so it had a body and it had little tentacles and it had stuff through it, right? Okay. So that was showing us radially symmetrical. Had to do with a circle. It basically means it looks the same all the way around. Okay. So radial symmetry. Bilateral, we talked about, means that you can only have it one side or one plane, cut it into left and right, and it looks the same. Everything else about it looks different. So if you cut me in the middle, cut me at an angle, you cut me across the outside out here, the two sides look different. But you go right down the middle, you have two sides that look the same. So bilateral. Two sides look the same. And that's a big advancement. Next thing to come along, is this protostome and deuterostome that we kind of talked about. Remember, I'm not asking you to remember what all that entails. We need to, but that's hard to remember. We need to remember stome is referring to where the mouth came from. Okay? Stoma is the mouth. Like on leaves, it's the opening underneath the leaf. On these creatures, where the mouth developed is a big deal. Because if it develops with other tissues that become eyes, brains, things like that, you have cephalization. You have a head. If it doesn't, you don't have a true head region that is segmented. Does that make sense? Okay? So these guys that are up here, arthropods, they have a segmented head region, but they're still protostomes. So they're going to be one of the higher protostomes, but they're going to be lower on the evolutionary tree for what we call advanced. Then roundworms, no real head region. Flatworms, it looks like it, but it's not really a true head region. Annelids we'll talk about, no head region. And then mollusks, they have kind of a little head region. They have a little brain in there, those snails. But they don't have a true segmented body like the arthropods. They do a little, but not a true segmented body. So the protostomes, where their mouth developed was from the little hole in that blastula we said. But a bigger development was the deuterostomes. That's these guys. And that's where we have echinoderms. and chordates. That's why I told you yesterday starfish are considered a little more advanced than all the other things without a vertebral column. And the reason is they are a deuterostome. Where their mouth developed is important. Plus, they have a vascular water system. They have a skeleton. They can pump water in and out of that skeleton to clamp onto stuff with tubes like octopuses do. They have a nerve system. They don't have a nerve cord, per se, like a chordate, but they have a very good developed nervous system. So echinoderms are pretty advanced, even though they don't look it. All right, so let's talk about each of these guys. First of all, a sponge. All of these guys, remember, are invertebrates. No true internal vertebral column. They may have some resemblance of a skeleton, maybe have a shell, maybe have a water skeleton, but they don't have a vertebral column or a nerve cord. So again, sponges, these guys are basically just a mass of living cells. They're living together, they're specialized, but they don't have any tissues, anything like that, no true body cavity, nothing. They're very, very ancient. They're the most ancient animals we have proof of. Okay? And when I say that, I'm saying proof of like in fossil evidence. Cnidarians, that's the word for like sea anemones, okay, and we have hydras, different things like that. They're soft-bodied and they're carnivorous. What does that mean? What is carnivorous? Come on now.
They eat meat.
Oh, they
They eat meat. So these guys try to eat other living creatures, like fish and things. They catch them. They have this little system, kind of like a harpoon system. Their cells, they have these little special stinging cells called nematocysts. And in there, they have a little connective tissue and a little harpoon-looking thing. It's like a stinger. When something comes along and touches that part of their tentacle, that cell pops and shoots that little harpoon in there. And it has some poisons to it. They can paralyze fish. Some of them are really strong. Some of them are a little weaker. Okay? But jellyfish, some of them that we see, you ever heard of a Portuguese man-of-war? You ever heard of those guys? If you ever go to the Texas coast, you need to know what those are. Their true name is called Physalia. That is their scientific name. But they have a little air pouch that looks like a sail. They float along the ocean. They have tentacles down below them. You step on it, it's going to sting you, even if it's on the beach dead. Those little cells will fire, and you will be in some intense pain. They're extremely painful to humans. But they paralyze fish. Because again, they're in the water. If I catch a fish, what happens if I have a fish on a hook? Does it like just come to me? No, it swims around everywhere, right? Pulling the line. So these guys sting them, so the fish paralyzes so it doesn't pull and tear them up. Because they're catching them with their body, aren't they? So that paralyzes it and it can wrap it up and dissolve it.
Pardon the interruption. I need Kiki, Louise, and Sophie to report to the front, to the library foyer.
Okay? So again, all cnidarians have these little stinging cells, but these are like your jellyfish, your sea anemones, your hydras, all those guys. They're radially symmetrical and carnivorous, and they all live in the water. None of them are on land. Thank goodness. That'd be awful if a jellyfish could like come cruising in the room and sting you. Okay? The next one are arthropods. Most of your insects, or things you call insects, will be in here. These are segmented. They have a very tough exoskeleton. They don't have an inside skeleton, but it's a very hard outside shell that protects them. They have true cephalization. They have...
Pardon the interruption. With the following students, please report to the band hall. Owen Elliott, Gabby Almonte, Lydia Cruz, Alexis Garcia, Kamara Garza, Janae Lopez, Avery Mahan, Jenna Otwell, Gabby Reyna, and Cassie Smith. Thank you.
Okay, so we have cephalization. That's a true head region. So there's going to be eyes, mouth, and a brain type thing all in the same area, localized. And then these guys have what's called jointed appendages. You have those. An appendage is something that sticks off of the main body. Jointed means it can bend. Now these guys have jointed appendages so they can walk. They're not quite as smooth and fluid as most animals, but they can. So these arthropods are pretty important guys. They have pretty good advancements. Next ones are nematodes. They're unsegmented worms, okay? They have a fake coelom. That means they have a body cavity. First creatures to have a true body cavity in there, okay? And I say true, it's not true, but it's a space that they have in their body. They have a coelom, it's just called a false coelom. They have a digestive tract that has two openings. So they have a mouth and an anus, and it's connected. So their food, whatever they eat, or dissolve, it goes through them. Okay, it's a true, huh?
So it's like a snake?
No, it's a type of worm. They're a worm. It says some are free living. What do y'all think free living means? What does it mean to be free living? So like you're a hippie and you get to like cruise and be in communes and stuff? What does it mean? Yeah, it means it lives on its own. It can move around, it can go find food, it can do stuff on its own. It's free living. And then some of them are parasitic. And these are the most common ones you see. When you see a nematode, you're going to see them when you wormed your dog or your pig or your sheep or something, your cattle, and these worms come out, they're nematodes. Most of them are the parasitic worms that get in animals. But there are some free living. They're terrestrial, which means they live on land, and there's some that live aquatic in the water. Flatworms, we talked about these guys yesterday. They are unsegmented. Even though they look like they have a head, they don't have a true head region. But they have true tissues, true organ systems, and they're the simplest animal with 3 germ layers. Simplest meaning the least advanced, the least amount of tissues and organs and all that stuff, but they have 3 germ layers. They still have no body cavity, but they have 3 germ layers. Okay? So, pretty important creatures. What did we say these guys can do though? They regenerate. You regenerate. You do. If you get a cut or a scratch or a hole and part of your tissue's gone, did it stay gone? No, what do we call it? What do we say it happens? If I get a cut or something, and then once it's fixed, we say it healed. That's regeneration. Your tissue grew, regenerated, it came back. But if you cut an arm off, we can't regenerate it. These guys, you can cut them in half and they regenerate the other half. Pretty cool. We have regeneration, just not full tissues. I've seen a kid that I coached in Comanche, they were loading a 4-wheeler. Don't know why, but they were going to load it from the ground instead of someone riding it. When it started falling off of the tracks going up on the pickup, out of instinct, you reach to grab it. Which you normally wouldn't do that, but out of instinct, he did. That 4-wheeler pinched his fingers between the bed of the pickup and the 4-wheeler, and it cut the tip of his finger off. They went to the doctor real quick. They sewed it back on. Said more than likely it won't keep, but we're going to try. So they sewed it on, and they kept it all wrapped up and he took care of it for a while. We were outside. They let him play football because he did it the first of the summer, last of the spring semester. When it came football season, it was attached pretty good, but it still looked like it wasn't alive. When we were in football practice one day, he come running over there and goes, "Coach, my finger fell off." The tip that had died fell off, and he had a finger. It was regenerating on the end of it. Now, of course, his nail looked weird and all that, but it looked like a finger. So the tissue had been healing inside of that part that they sewed back on. So you regenerate somewhat. You do it pretty well in muscles and tendons. You tear them, what happens to them? Most of the time they heal. Sometimes you got to get them replaced. But most of the time you twist an ankle, you wait 3 to 4 weeks, those tendons heal, right? They regenerate, they regrow. But we can't do what they do. Now, hardly any animal at all can. Starfish, flatworms. They can regenerate the whole other half. All right, annelids. These are true segmented worms. Okay? They have a true coelom. That means they have a body cavity that's surrounded by mesoderm. So they have ectoderm, they have mesoderm, and inside their mesoderm, they have a body cavity. Then they have the endoderm. First creatures to have that. Some are terrestrial. These are like your earthworms, those type of guys. Okay. Some are aquatic, like this guy. There's some real pretty, very, very pretty worms that live in the ocean. They attract stuff. Why would they want to attract them? To eat them. Yeah. They attract them to eat them. Okay. Just like if you're sitting there and a centipede, they don't really attract stuff, but they hunt insects, right? They're a terrestrial annelid. Well, there's some in the water that go, and they actually try to attract them and catch them and eat them. And then again, just like the other worms, the nematodes, some of these are free living, means they live out on their own, like an earthworm, stuff like that. Then there are some parasitic annelids. Okay? So they have to live in or on a creature. Mollusks. Mollusks are typified by having a shell. Okay? But the deal is, an octopus has one, but it's very, very small. Squids have one, it's a little bigger, but it's still real small. All the other guys in this division, mollusks, like snails, okay, those guys have shells. What are the ones that look like a snail that don't have a shell? What are those guys called? Slugs. Yeah, they're going to have a little piece of what was a shell in there, but they don't have it on them. You have a chambered nautilus. Those are huge. They look like squids with these spiraled shells that they can put air in and float and swim in the ocean. You're going to have bivalves. What does bi mean? Two. Valve is talking about openings. So those are your clams and oysters, mussels. They have two pieces, right? Bivalves. Pectins. Those are another kind. Those guys are shells. They don't have a skeleton. Sometimes they have a water skeleton like an octopus. If an octopus is on land, he just looks like a mass of tissue, just a gelatinous mass of tissue. They get in the water, they look like an octopus, and they can control how big and where they move and stuff. An octopus can, and probably smaller, but I've seen on videos a big octopus squeeze through a spot about that big. Their whole body can crawl through it. Another thing about octopus is they're incredibly smart. They hunt, okay, by disguise. They hunt by trapping or herding. They also hunt by fishing. I watched a National Geographic video, kind of like John watches the back of his eyes. I watched this on TV. And this octopus was in its little hiding place in the rocks, and one of its arms was out there and had a fish. And another fish comes along, and the sucker comes out and grabs it. He was fishing. You know anything else that does that? We do it. We consider ourselves some of the smartest creatures on the planet, yet we'll fish with little minnows on a hook and line, just like those guys fish, trying to lure in some bigger bait. Octopus are incredibly smart. They proved it in tests, all kinds of stuff. Okay? Squids, they hunt and they fish. Same thing. They're very aggressive predators in the ocean. They have complex organ systems. They have a true coelom, so they have that mesoderm around the two body cavities. And they're trochophore, which I don't expect you to learn that name, but they're larvae. You know what larvae are, right? Like the little tiny infants of small creatures. They're free living. So even oysters, mussels, clams, their larval stage can swim around in the ocean and go find somewhere to sit. And then whenever it gets where it wants to, then it anchors down and grows the valves and all that. But all of its larvae can swim around and are free living. Okay, so it's a pretty big deal. Next, echinoderms. These are your starfish. They have an internal skeleton. It's not like true bones. It's not going to be like true bones or a vertebral column, but they do have an internal skeleton that supports them. They have a water vascular system, kind of like the octopus. They have little cups. They put it on there. They suck the water out that was in the cup, and it forms a suction, and they can grab and hold on to stuff. Starfish are strong enough, some of them, they get on clams, and they can get on each side, and they can pull the clam open. Bless you. Other ones use their mouth parts to drill little holes and suck the clam out of the shell. Starfish are a very advanced creature. They just don't look like it to us, so we think not, but they're very advanced. They are radially symmetrical in the adults, and it is a 5-part radial symmetry. That means that if we cut this guy, obviously I could cut it at an angle and it wouldn't, but if I cut it down any arm, it's going to be symmetrical in the other side. Okay? And internally, they're 5-part radially symmetrical. That means that each arm is built the same. The center disc they have is the same. If you cut in the middle, it's going to look the same. So they're very advanced creatures, even though they don't look like it to us. All right. So again, here's that cladiogram. It's got all of those creatures talking about. All of these, again, are invertebrates. No true vertebral column. And then all of that stuff. So y'all have the rest of today to work on those answers.